Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The U.S. Special Climate Envoy John Kerry's 4-day visit to Beijing came to an end, though there were expectations that the world's two biggest carbon polluters could reach a new agreement after rounds of closed-door meetings. The two failed to find an immediate breakthrough. What different views do they have? And aside from that, could we say the two countries are now seeing a starting point to thaw their frosty bilateral ties? To discuss this, we invite Dr. Kim Yang-gyu, a principal researcher at the East Asia Institute. Dr. Kim, welcome.
Thank you.
And we also have Mr. Jeff Moon, president of China Moon Strategies and the former Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for China. Mr. Moon, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, now first question to our Dr. Kim. Now, the visit of former Secretary of State John Kerry to China is the third visit by a U.S. official to Beijing in recent weeks. And what does the U.S. climate envoy's visit hint at?
Yeah, right. As you mentioned, Mr. Kerry's visit to China was the third visit by American senior officials to Beijing after Secretary Blinken and Secretary Yellen. And I believe his visit will be followed by Commerce Secretary Raimondo's visit in the near future. And this implies that, first, I think Washington is willing to renew talks between senior level officials from the two countries, as agreed upon by President Biden and President Xi during the Bali summit last November. While there have not been any major achievements from these talks so far, this renewed engagement might pave the way of rapprochement between the two countries later this year. Second, I also believe that Special Envoy Kerry's visit implies a general shift in Washington's China policy, with the U.S. now implementing its de-risking strategy. Since President von der Leyen mentioned the term in her speech in April this year, it has been widely used by senior American officials in their public speeches and by American leaders during the G7 Hiroshima summit. And they use it to explain that their China policies do not involve decoupling. Although the actual meaning of the term is debatable, I think it basically indicates that there are areas where they want to compete with China, such as cutting-edge technologies like AI, that has significant military implications. But there are other areas they want to cooperate with China. So the climate change has consistently been included among the areas of cooperation. So the visit of U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate itself demonstrates Washington's willingness to engage with China.
Right. So the visit was significant in that it paved the way to improve bilateral ties. Now, our focus was on tackling climate crisis, and I'd like to delve a little deeper into this. So, Mr. Moon, Washington and Beijing, we need to know that they are the world's top two greenhouse gas emitters. How are they, especially China, seeing the urgency of the climate change issue, and how are they trying to deal with this?
Well, in a literal sense, both countries are seeing the urgency of climate change every day as they observe record high temperatures, flooding, and forest fires. In a political sense, however, the picture is mixed, and government leaders are not reacting as quickly as they should. As you said, China is currently the world's top emitter of greenhouse gases, emitting more than twice as much as the U.S., but the U.S. has produced more historically. So Xi Jinping this week repeated China's pledge to reach peak emissions by 2030 and to reach zero emissions by 2060. He emphasized that China will proceed at its own pace, which includes continuing to build more coal-fired plants than any other country. The U.S. thinks that China's current pace is too slow. So John Kerry has consistently pressed his counterparts to accelerate the current timetable, but without any success. Meanwhile, both countries are investing in environmentally friendly technologies, but those efforts, quite frankly, are not sufficient to prevent global warming at the current pace.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Kim, that being said, Mr. Kerry specifically urged China to partner with the U.S. to cut the methane emissions and reduce coal-fired power. Now, could you give us details on what Mr. Kerry asked China to do to tackle this climate crisis?
Actually, the Special Envoy Kerry mentioned a few issues during his testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on July 13th regarding his meeting agenda with his counterparts in China. And he said methane is 20 to 80 times more destructive than carbon dioxide, and it is particularly important for U.S.-China cooperation on climate change. Then he mentioned that accelerating ways of doing things and increasing the deployment of renewables are his main areas of focus. However, he emphasized that by 2030, China will have somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 gigawatts of renewable energy, which is 5 times larger than any other country on the planet. So China is a very interesting case. And it is very obvious that he would have urged China to phase out coal faster rather than invest more in clean energy. And China has pledged to peak carbon emission by 2030, as just Mr. Moon said, and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. And President Xi Jinping also promised that China will reduce its use of coal starting 2026. However, it doesn't seem likely to happen if China's current dependence on coal continues in the near future. So, and Mr. Kerry confirmed that this during his digital press briefing today, and he did talk more about phasing out rather than investing more. And he said, one, transition from coal-based power more rapidly, and two, having a positive impact together to make the COP successful, and three, discussing how to deal with non-carbon dioxide gases like methane were the top 3 issues he discussed.
Why, right. So it seems like China has its own goals regarding this climate crisis, and it seems the U.S. is trying to request China to speed up this plan. But Mr. Moon, according to some local media outlets, Chinese experts point out that the U.S. needs to show its sincerity by removing, punitive measures on China's green industry, such as tariffs on solar panels and so on. What's China's position in terms of cooperating with the U.S. on this issue?
Several Chinese officials and the state-controlled Global Times recounted this week how China suspended climate change discussions after the U.S. Speaker of the House visited Taiwan last August. They emphasized that future climate cooperation is not possible without alignment on Taiwan policy. So China is not seeking sincerity, but rather a change in U.S. policy regarding Taiwan. Meanwhile, the same Global Times criticized U.S. restrictions on the import of Chinese solar panels without mentioning the 2 reasons why those measures were imposed. First, the U.S. imposed tariffs because China subsidizes those products and dumps them overseas below cost, which is punishable in the United States through tariffs. Second, significant evidence that anyone can find on the internet shows that the polysilicon used to manufacture solar products in China's Xinjiang region are the product of forced labor. And the U.S. has banned forced labor imports for a century or so. So the picture is a lot more complicated than the Chinese press version of the story.
I believe what our Mr. Moon talked about resonates more in that China's top diplomat Wang Yi said that cooperation cannot be, separated from overall environment between the 2 countries. Now, Dr. Kim, however, from Washington's point of view, it does not seem an easy decision for the U.S. to remove what China calls punitive measures on China's, certain industries. Is that the case? I mean, can the U.S. provide what China wants in terms of, changing its own policy, like our Mr. Moon pointed out?
Yeah, I think Mr. Moon already beautifully answered the question, and these all things are, the main motivation behind the Inflation Reduction Act is try to reboost and build robust solar industry within the U.S. And so this measure is closely connected to protecting American industries and addressing the human rights issues, as he just mentioned. So this is not going to be easy for U.S. to change. And besides, according to reports from Chinese official media outlets and the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, the indicators for sincerity the Chinese high officials like Premier Li Chang and Director Wang Yi use include technical support to developing countries in their green transition. And they also argued that U.S.-China climate change cooperation is inseparable from the overall development of bilateral relations. And one of the primary hurdles preventing the development of healthy relations according to China, between the U.S. and China, according to China, Chinese experts pointed out the prohibition of investment in China's semiconductor, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence sectors. Yet these technologies are, I believe, precisely the list of sensitive technologies that could tilt the military balance between the U.S. and China that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan mentioned while he explains Washington's de-risking strategy. So this is not going to happen, for sure. And that's why also Mr. Kerry made it very clear that there is no concession to to China when he testified before the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on July 13.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Moon, given what our experts told us up until now, could we say that it would be difficult for, climate negotiations to serve as a way to tackle the other political issues between the two countries?
Well, I think that that's basically correct, at least in theory. I think at the beginning of the Biden administration, Secretary of State Blinken said there are three kinds of issues in the bilateral relationship. They include some where we cooperate, others where we compete, and yet others where we will confront each other. If you look at the issues involving potential cooperation, most of them are transnational in nature. They include not only climate change, but also, say, North Korea, pandemics, other issues that affect all nations and all people. And in all cases, cooperation between the U.S. and China would contribute significantly to the task of finding and developing solutions. So I think the hope in the U.S. is that establishing a cooperative spirit in the transnational context might spill over to some degree in the bilateral context. And for that reason, it's a positive sign that at least Xie Zhenhua, the lead climate negotiator, has suggested that cooperation on climate change might have a positive impact on the broader relationship, although there are other Chinese statements to the contrary.
I see. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Now, Mr. Moon, one more question. Let's move on to the upcoming schedule. The U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo is also set to visit Beijing soon. Could there be any noteworthy developments in bilateral relationship stemming from these visits?
Well, it's important to interpret a visit by Secretary Raimondo, which has yet to be officially announced, in context. Presidents Biden and Xi agreed last November in Bali to try to stabilize bilateral relations through these high-level visits. And a Raimondo visit would be the next step in that process. But what's different about Raimondo is that her portfolio includes some of the most contentious issues in the bilateral relationship. She's responsible for export controls, the CHIPS Act rollout, and promoting American export, among other things. I think that most observers anticipate that her visit will not result in major concessions on either side. She will not, for example, offer changes in American sanctions policy, just as the Chinese will not change their policy of converting foreign civilian technologies for military purposes, including weapons. So it'll be interesting to see how the Chinese leaders react to her, and her reception will indicate where we're going in the bilateral relationship and whether the dialogue will improve relations.
I see. Now, Dr. Kim, meanwhile, the Kremlin recently said that a trip by Putin to China is on the agenda, though the details have not been released yet. Now, what message might China and Russia be trying to send by showing off their ties amid, improving relationship between the U.S. and China?
Well, I'm not sure whether they intend to show off their ties, but yes, there has been consistent pattern of China and Russia strengthening their relations with each other and with other authoritarian regimes like North Korea since the outbreak of war in Ukraine. And this is why Pyongyang believes the world is rapidly shifting into a new Cold War era. And the UN Security Council has continuously failed to condemn DPRK's violation of UN Security Council resolution due to the opposition from China and Russia. And meanwhile, South Korean President Yoon, as you already know, made a surprise visit to Ukraine on July 15th, and Washington welcomed this. So it looks like the world is divided into two camps, supporting either Russia or Ukraine. But the Russian unprovoked attack and violation of territorial sovereignty of Ukraine actually directly goes against China's long-held principle of respecting internal affairs and territorial integrity. So I believe that supporting Moscow will likely become more of a liability than a strategic asset for Beijing in the long run. However, as Beijing kept criticizing, Washington has the capability to suppress China's advancement in key technologies like semiconductor and AI, I just mentioned before. So China needs to build a stronger partnership with other countries to fight against this pressure. That is why Director Wang Yi said that de-risking is another term for decoupling and urged the EU to clarify its strategic positioning when he met EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Borrell last week in Jakarta, and also when President Xi Jinping met with Russian Federation Council Speaker Matvienko on July 10th, he emphasized that the development of China-Russia relations is a strategic choice based on fundamental interests of the two countries. So I believe this is a marriage of convenience that will likely sustain for some time, for sure. but I'm not sure whether this marriage could hold up for long.
Oh, I see. Oh, now, Dr. Kim, though there's a long way to go, efforts to improve relations between China and the U.S. has certainly impacted the relationship between Seoul and Beijing as well. And recently, the foreign ministers of each country, Park Jin and the top diplomat Wang Yi, they met each other during ASEAN meetings in Jakarta. Now, how did you see this event?
Well, yeah, indeed, as far as I know, but Seoul has not officially used the term de-risking yet, but I guess South Korean government would also need to come up with its updated positioning between the U.S. and China that reflects changes in reality. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration's national security strategy published last month suggests that it will pursue a healthier and more mature relationship with China built on mutual respect and reciprocity. This basically means that there are limitation areas of cooperation between the two countries because you say, we need this because we don't have it, right? So during the meeting in the Jakarta on the sideline of the 2023 ASEAN-related foreign ministers meetings, both Director Wang and Minister Park agreed that ROK and PRC are close neighbors sharing important common interests, and their cooperation would contribute to peace and stability in the region. However, while Director Wang strongly asserts that the Taiwan issue is at the core of China's core interest, that forms the political foundation of the bilateral relations, deciding the level of credibility towards Seoul, Minister Park replied that South Korea's position on the one China policy has not changed. But it seems that Director Wang Yi did not respond to Minister Park's request to play a constructive role for peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. In China, Chinese media did not even report this as well. So I believe that although China emphasized the importance of acknowledging difference while pursuing the same point, or 구동존이, harmony in diversity, I sense more difference and not much of harmony here.
All right, I see. Now, I believe this would be our last question, but I'd like to ask both of our experts on this. Now, Mr. Moon, South Korea and China are not just close neighbors, but also inseparable partners in terms of trade and other sectors as well. So how should the two countries' relationship develop, in your opinion?
Well, I think both countries should and will act in accordance with their national interests. China is important to South Korea for a variety of reasons. China obviously is a large market. That's a potential source of economic growth. But that growth potential comes with the cost of Chinese economic leverage. And China exploited that leverage, for example, during its boycott in response to South Korean deployment of THAAD missiles. So de-risking may be an important theme. In the political sphere, China is important because it may have some influence with North Korea. Although North Korea's ongoing aggressive behavior casts doubt on the extent of that influence and whether the Chinese are exercising it. From a military perspective, there are questions about Chinese military intentions in Asia and the potential impact on South Korean national security. So South Korea knows that it needs to proceed cautiously. China is, as you said, an inseparable partner in many ways, but that partnership brings both significant dangers and opportunities.
I see your point. How about you, Dr. Kim? What's your view on this?
I perfectly agree with what Mr. Moon said, but I also want to point out a couple of structural changes that are occurring now. And economic relations has been the driving force behind the development of ROC-PRC relations. And 10 years ago, I vividly remember that there is widespread perception that U.S. was Korea's important security partner, while China is our important economic partner. This is changing now. For the first time in 21 years, South Korea's current account balance with China registered deficit in 2022, while trade with the United States marked an all-time high surplus. Of course, this could be just transient trends due to the lingering effect of COVID-19 pandemic, but it also because of China's effort to become self-sufficient in producing electronic components, which it used to import from Korea. If this is the case, then China seeks further tech self-sufficiency to counter the decoupling or de-risking strategy of the like-minded countries in the West. It will have a significant and structural impact on the South Korea-China relations overall. And furthermore, while both Director Wang Yi and Minister Park Jin emphasized the importance of people-to-people exchanges, well, Korean and Chinese public perception of each other is currently at its historically low point. And I do believe that these changes are partly influenced by the intensifying strategic competition between the U.S. and China, the fighting between big guys. But however, this also stems from some structural changes occurring in ROK-PRC relations. And if these challenges are not addressed properly, we might need to fundamentally rethink the future path of bilateral relations.
Right, I see your point. Now, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Dr. Kim and Mr. Moon, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.